Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Dan Su here with more Stormbound. So the devs today actually just released 10 new cards that they're probably going to implement later this month. And there's 2 for every class, and I'm just going to talk about them, give you guys some ideas about how to use them. Um, the devs actually only spoiled the level 1 versions of every card, and so today I'm also going to just give some predictions about what the cards are going to be at level 5. I think that when I first entered this game, a lot of the times I would only judge a card by its level 1 and level 2, but as shown by some cards like Herald's Hymn, the higher level versions of the card actually matter a lot more because that's going to be the version you're playing with, and some cards scale up like linearly, and some cards scale up a lot better. So the first card that I'm going to talk about is Confinement. It's a neutral spell. And it's a removal spell that's kind of similar to a couple that have already been added to the game, like Execution or Broken Truce. So what it does is it reduces the strength of a target enemy unit to 5. And this seems a little underwhelming because even though it's a pretty unique ability, the only other card that can do this is Siren of the Seas. It's pretty situational. The only targets that you're going to be really happy about hitting are those that have like 10 or more strength, like Siren of the Seas or Shark Fist Exiles or no, not Siren, Lady Rhyme. And so it's actually not that great level 1, but I think the way that it's going to scale up is they're either going to reduce the cost every other level and increase the strength of the card every other level, or they're going to reduce the cost once and increase the strength of it by 1 every other level than that. So I think both of these possibilities are likely because Broken Truce is a removal spell where they reduce the cost every other, and then a lot of other cards they tend to reduce the cost by 1 at level 4, such as Kindred's Grace. So I think at level 5 or even at higher levels, this card is actually pretty powerful. I think the classes that would use it the most are probably decks that are looking to play the late game because that's when you're going to run into the most occurrences to use this card. The biggest weakness of this card is that after you use it, it's guaranteed that the enemy unit is still there. So it's going to take at least 2 cards to destroy it. But it has pretty good synergy with, say, your green prototypes because as long as you can keep the strength of this card matching your green prototypes at like mid levels where your green prototype is like 3 strength or 4 strength, then Confinement plus green prototypes is a very good removal spell for it. It's probably going to be 5 mana removal to kill any unit. But other than that, I think it's a pretty solid card to add to the neutral collection. It's probably not going to be seeing that much use, but it's a little too early to tell. So the next card is Flooding the Gates, and okay, so you guys can probably hear that my computer is whistling, but sorry, I can't do anything about that right now. So the next card is Flooding of the Gates. It's a 6 mana for dealing 3 damage to all units bordering your base. This is probably the most exciting card for a lot of you guys because everybody hates Swarm aggro nowadays, or they play Swarm aggro, or they hate it, or they do both. And so this is going to be a great card to kill units outside of your base. Most of the time right now, if you can land 4 units bordering the enemy's base, then they're pretty much done for. And so Flooding of the Gates is a way to prevent that. I think this card is very solid in control decks right now. But the real question is whether control decks can actually exist right now in Stormbound, because even the latest game decks have to run a lot of early game cards, and especially since the incoming patch is going to change Gift of the Wise, which was the biggest reason why Winter could play Control while still surviving the early game. Now that they're removing that card, I don't know how viable Control will be. But if late game decks do exist, Flooding the Gates will be a huge card to play in it. I'm guessing that what they're going to do is not change the mana cost and just up the strength by 1 every single time. But it's possible that they reduce the cost by a little bit, but so far, none of the spells, especially none of the neutral spells that deal damage, are actually have their cost reduced. Like Execution doesn't have its cost reduced, as well as Needle Blast doesn't have its cost reduced. So I think that Flooding the Gates will probably follow the same pattern. Although 6 mana for 7 damage to all units bordering your base, if you can land on 2 units, then that's already very good. Although one concern I do have with Flooding the Gates is that for Swarm decks, you're not so worried about units that are right outside your base as you're worried about units that are 2 tiles from your base, because those are the units that are going to be able to be hemmed into your base next turn. So it's actually, I think, even though it's a solid tool for defense, I don't think by itself it's going to be enough for to fight off Swarm decks. But then again, like if your deck's primary concern is Swarm, then a 6 mana card isn't going to be your saving grace anyways. It is going to be something that every deck, I think, is going to have to play around now. Like, I don't think if you're going against a control deck, you will no longer want to just put all your units right outside the enemy's base, because one Flooding the Gates could wipe out your whole army, which would be pretty bad. Okay, so on to the up-and-coming faction that I'm very excited about, which is Shadowfen. So Shadowfen, I think after the nerfs to Swarm and Winter, is going to be pretty able to contest the spot for top faction. And then they release a 2 mana unit for Shadowfen, which is just bonkers, because as we all know by now, the low mana units, Green Prototypes, North Sea Dogs, First Mutineer, Gifted Recruits, are almost always auto-includes in every single deck because you have to contest the early game. And Copperskin Ranger, which is a 2 mana card, is going to be super strong for Shadowfen. It poisons a random unit on top of that, which at this point in the game, it's very difficult to have poison synergy, because a lot of cards that rely on enemies being poisoned are worse when the enemy units have low HP. So, for example, Amber Hides, which can drain strength from poisoned units, will not be that effective after you upgrade your Toxic Sacrifice, because when your Toxic Sacrifice deals more damage, then your Amber Hides is going to drain less poison. It's going to drain less strength from your poison unit. So Copperskin Ranger poisons the unit without dealing damage to it, and I think that this is a super crazy mechanic. They're also putting it on Venomfall Spire, but to put it on a unit that also moves on top of this is just exactly what you dream about. This card, I'm pretty sure it's going to have to receive a nerf later on, but we'll see. It's still too early to tell, and I'm just making some blind predictions here. But I think it's possible. So I'm guessing what they're going to do is they're going to alternate the upping the strength and the number of units that it poisons. So that at level 5, it will be 3 strength, and it will poison 3 random units. It's also possible that instead they're going to up the strength to 3, but instead up the damage that it deals to 1 random unit, which is actually a likely possibility. I just forgot to include it here, but that would I think it would be worse, because first of all, you're poisoning you're poisoning fewer units for your synergies, and second of all, poisoning only 1 unit and then starting to deal damage to it once again falls into the same trap that makes cards like Amber Hide not so good. So all in all, either way that it goes, at level 5, we're pretty much guaranteed Copperskin Ranger to have 3 strength or more, and I think this is going to be a super solid addition to Shadowfen. I think it's gonna put it over the top. Like, you don't even have to play a poison strategy. Just having this extra early game unit means that you can pretty much do any strategy you want. You can play a High Priestess Claxi to turn all your weak units into strong units, or you can play Kindred's Grace to like make your Toad super strong. Like, Copperskin Ranger is super enabling. All right, so on to the next one, Harpies of the Hunt. This is it's a pretty generic 3 mana 4 strength card with no movement. I think a lot of people were pretty sad that they decided that the devs decided to add some like vanilla cards into the game. But I think the game is still in an early stage of development. I think these kinds of cards deserve to be in the game just to be some filler. Like, newer players can play the game without thinking so much, and so on and so forth. And because it's a super vanilla card, we can pretty much guess that it's going to go up by 1 strength per level. So at 5, Level 5, it's going to be 3 mana for 8 strength, which seems pretty good, but you do have to consider that a level 5 Westwind Sailors is 3 mana for 7 strength with 1 movement, which I think is almost always superior. And furthermore, there's very little synergy with being a Raven, because Kindred's Grace usually is applied to Toads. So we're not too excited about this card, but I think it's going to be decent filler. I know some decks already play Cabin Girls, and they're not even playing a pirate deck. So I think any Shadowfen deck that would play Cabin Girls, Harpies of the Hunt is basically a better version. But nothing too exciting here. Let's move on. Okay, Ozone Purifiers. This is the other card that I'm very excited about, because once again, it's a low mana card. It's a unit, and it does something. So this card is for Ironclad, which is the other really weak faction right now, and I think the devs are very smart to include this card to add a little bit more of that pushing unit mechanic also. So I'm pretty sure this card looks very similar to the Freeze 1 mana card in Winter Pact right now, which is Frost Hexers. So I'm guessing it's going to receive the same treatment, which at level 5, it's going to push all surrounding units away, and it'll also go up in strength by 2. So 2 mana for 4 strength is already very good. I don't think that it's going to be any less than 4 strength, because if we look at a similar ability, which is Dr. Mia, at level 4 she is also 4 strength, or at level 5 she is also 4 strength, and then her ability is like do all of whatever. And this card is a common, which means that a lot of people are going to be taking Ozone Purifiers to at least 2 mana 3 strength and then 2 mana 4 strength, which is very good. You guys who play a little longer may remember that Freebooters used to be 2 mana, and that card was nuts. Oh, given it was also nuts because it was part of the cycling strategy that Winter decks use. But by itself, an extra 2 mana card that does something is pretty solid. Ozone Purifiers allows you to live a little bit longer against Swarm decks, against other rush decks, and manipulating the board is also it's a pretty unique mechanic right now. We don't tend to see it a lot because most of the cards that can manipulate the board are high mana cards. We have the spell that pushes units away, which is Flaming Stream, and we also have Windmakers and Arm Schemers. But those cards are all very high mana, so we do not have a lot of experience with this mechanic, and I think it's possible that it could be pretty game breaking depending on clever usage of it. So I'm very excited about this card. I think that Ironclad, it's not as good as the low mana card as Copperskin Ranger, but I think it's still a very solid card. Like especially again, it's a common. Like the devs are doing us a huge favor by making so many of these new cards common so that we can experiment with them. So the other card for Ironclad is Delegators. Construct 6 mana, 7 strength, 1 movement. Again, it's a pretty vanilla card, but I guess we don't really have one in the 6 mana slot yet. So here it is. I'm guessing, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly how much strength it's going to have at level 5. But based off of Veterans, who is 7 mana, basically the same card, he ends up with 7 mana, 16 strength. So Delegators is not going to go over 14, and it's not going to go under 13 either. So it's probably either 13 or 14 strength. Either way, I don't think it's going to see too much play because already, like at the 5 mana level, we have Heroic Soldiers, who is already not that popular. We don't see Heroic Soldiers a lot. And so at 6 mana, like I don't expect Delegators to be used that much either. Although I actually, now that I'm looking at Heroic Soldier's strength, which caps out at 10, I'm guessing Delegators is probably going to be 13 strength actually. So 14 strength is pretty ambitious, but we would like to see it at least double from 7 to 14, right? Because that's what Veterans does. It goes from 8 base to 16 at level 5. So hopefully it will double. But either way, like especially Ironclad already has a 6 mana legendary which moves in the form of Project Phoenix. So to add another 6 mana card that also moves that does kind of the same effect, but is all in all not as strong. I have my doubts as to how good it really will be. Okay, on to Shadowfen and Winter. So I saved these two classes for last because I'm not too excited about their cards. They're pretty good. They're nice. I like the fact that the devs added these to the classes, but they're not as exciting. They're not as game breaking, I think. So the first one we have is Doppelbocks. On play, spawn a 1 strength satyr on the tile in front, and it has 2 strength. So what immediately pops out is we already have a card called Brothers in Arms, which does the exact same thing for the exact same mana, except it has 1 more base strength, and it spawns the unit behind it. So spawning in front is clearly a lot better. It pushes your front line up. So I'm guessing they're just going to scale it up by 1 strength each. So based off of Brother in Arms, if it follows a pattern where it alternates buffing the base strength and the unit strength that it spawns, it will end up as 3 mana for a 4 strength satyr, and it spawns a 3 strength satyr in front. But it could also take the route that a lot of, I think, a lot of like weaker cards or weaker base strength cards take, which is it only buffs its ability, so that at level 5 it actually just spawns a 5 strength satyr in front. Obviously, this is the version that you are going to hope for, because this is the version that you can use to heralds him immediately into the opponent's base. But it's asking for a lot. I'm pretty sure it's going to be every other, because a lot of the times a good way to defend against Swarm is to put a unit in the middle 2 columns. That is in the middle 2 columns that are 2 rows outside of your base, because what that means is that a lot of units get a lot of units that could move up 1 instead get redirected to attack your unit. Well, Doppelbocks completely just disobeys this because it spawns its unit in front. So as long as you have any tile that's open that is 2 rows outside of your base, they can play Doppelbocks and then heralds him in for a massive amount of damage. So all in all, I think this card is decent. It pushes your front line up. It's a very swarmy card, and not to mention it's another satyr, because Swarm is right now lacking in good satyrs to play from Queen of Herds, and I think this card can up that, especially now that they're buffing Queen of Herds to play satyrs out of your deck. It might be an extra option for Queen of Herds to play. Obviously, that means that you're not going to be pulling Dread Fawns, which is basically a strictly better version of Doppelbocks if you're playing it for free. But it's still a good addition to like the satyr population. I think it's going to be a good card to use. Excuse me. So the other Swarm card is called Dark Harvest. It's a 6 mana, deal 2 damage to each enemy bordering a friendly unit. So this card is it's hard to gauge how good it is, because essentially I'm pretty sure it can only hit an enemy unit once. So even if an enemy unit has 2 friendly units bordering it, it will still only take 2 damage, which means that in order to even get 6 points of value, your units have to be bordering 3 enemy units, which is I guess it can happen, but a lot of the times that's not what you're trying to do, because what Swarm is trying to do is win fast, right? But it's possible, given all the changes, that Swarm's going to be forced to shift into a more mid-gamey situation, and in that case, I think Dark Harvest can see some play. But at the same time, I don't feel that good. I don't feel that good about it. But until you upgrade it, which it might get a lot better, depending on how your games play out, because the only cards that we have right now that deal damage to bordering units is I think it's Poison. I think Poison's one of the only ones that deal damage to bordering units. Oh, we also have Armed Schemers that deals damage like that, and we also have the neutral card that when it attacks it deals AoE damage. Victors of the Melee. So these cards all don't see a lot of play, and Dark Harvest falls right in with them at like a high 6 mana. So it's gonna be very hard to tell whether it should be used or not. My 2 predictions for them don't account for the fact that it could deal surrounding damage instead. So actually, I want to amend this, which is I want to say that out of these two options, I'm pretty sure it's going to be one of these two, except it's going to deal one less damage, and it's going to deal it to surrounding units at level 5. And I think this surrounding change is going to be made probably at level 4, which it tends to be the norm. Yeah, now that I think of it, it's probably very likely to be a 6 mana Dark Harvest that deals 5 damage. That deals 5 damage to all surrounding enemy units from a friendly unit. So it's pretty good AOE, but I don't think that it's of all the factions that this card could land in, I think Swarm is probably the one that can least make use of it, other than Shadowfen, which already has a lot of AOE. So all in all, I'm gonna test it out, but I don't think it fits in with the playstyle that Swarm wants to do. All right, so on to the most boring faction, Winter. So the first unit, the unit that we got is it's pretty vanilla. I'm guessing, given veterans doubled in strength, like a lot of units tend to double in strength at level 5. Calming Spirits is probably going to go from 10 to 20. And you can make a comparison here between Calming Spirits and Lady Rhyme, which is Lady Rhyme at level 1 will have she's a base 5 mana for 4 strength, and so that means that 8 mana she'll be also 10 strength, which is exactly Calming Spirits. And at level 5, Lady Rhyme is she's 5 mana for 7 strength, and she gains 4 strength for each mana, which means that at 8 mana she will have 19 strength. So actually, Calming Spirits is surprisingly efficient in terms of mana, in that she can top Lady Rhyme at the 8 mana level, and Calming Spirits is a common, which means that it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to get her to level 4 or level 5 than a legendary. So I think that this could be a decent budget replacement for Lady Rhyme, even though most players who play Lady Rhyme tend to want to play her around like absurd amounts of mana, like 15, 20. So at that point, you kind of lost the value from Calming Spirits, because Calming Spirits is inflexible in terms of mana. But all in all, I think for newer players who are trying to play control decks, I think Calming Spirits is a decent addition. Another good comparison to make is Dawn Sparks, which is a 6 mana card, and it gains mana when it attacks. So Dawn Sparks is 6 mana for a 7 strength, but it can be upgraded to up to 6 mana for 14 strength. And at the point when you're reaching 14, 20 strength, I don't think that extra strength matters that much. So Calming Spirits can be replaced by, I think, Dawn Sparks and by Lady Rhyme. And so overall, not that interesting of a card. By the time you're getting to 8 mana, you probably want to do something as well as play a card, as opposed to play a 0 movement card. So I don't think it's going to be that useful. Moment's Peace. Okay, this is an interesting card because it's a 5 mana, give 4 strength to a target friendly unit or structure, and freeze all bordering enemies. So the thing that jumps out to me here is that it's another card that freezes, because one of the worst things about freezing was that you had so few cards that could react off of a freeze mechanic. You had Icicle Burst, which is pretty useless because it's 2 mana. It does nothing on its own, and you hate to draw it late game. And the other card is Midwinter Chaos, which deals damage to all frozen units. And then you also had Wisp Cloud, which is a pretty bad 4-drop unless it can hit a freeze unit, and in that case it deals damage to all surrounding frozen units, which is pretty good. So having an extra card in there to freeze units is going to make this strategy so much more. More fluid, more reliable. And if you count the number of cards that can now freeze, we have Midwinter Chaos, we have Frost Hexers, and we have Moment's Peace. So what this means is that a winter deck that is cycling with now it can't cycle with Gift of the Wise anymore, but it can cycle with Pirates. It can draw its cards really fast. It can pretty much freeze your units reliably every single turn, which means that it's going to be super hard to push against a late game winter deck, which means that if winter tries to go for the control route, Moment's Peace is going to be a huge game changer because what it does is it gives you that extra freeze card, which means now that you have 3 cards that can freeze, that's 1/4 of your deck, and you have 4 cards in your hand at any time, which is 1/3 of your deck. So the chance that you can freeze for multiple turns in a row is huge. You could literally have units like outside of your base for like a couple turns before you draw the card that deals damage to all units outside of your base. It's a really great defensive tactic. I'm not like too excited by this because I don't know if control is even viable at this point because they took out Gift of the Wise, which was a huge kicker for why Winter was a good deck, and so it's going to be hard to have the mana to chain these things together and do something else. Like Midwinter Chaos is 3 mana, which means that that any other card that reacts to it, other than Ice Cold Burst, is going to cost 4 or more mana because Frost because Wisp Cloud is 4 mana. So that means that even though you could freeze a unit by 3 mana, you need to wait until you actually have 7 mana in order to actually freeze and then do something about it. So even though it's a pretty annoying mechanic, it remains to be seen whether it's a viable playing strategy. So Moment's Peace, I'm guessing it's just going to upgrade to 7 strength instead of 4 strength, and then it's going to freeze surrounding units as opposed to bordering units. So at level 5, it's definitely it's a pretty straightforward scaling. It can now freeze surrounding units. It's probably going to get the surrounding at level 4, based on what the devs usually do, and I think yeah, it's a solid card if Winter can make a comeback from all the changes that were made against it. And actually, if it does, then people are going to hate Winter all the more because a freezing strategy is much more annoying to play against than a rush strategy. Because a rush strategy, if you lose to it, you lose in like 3-4 turns. You're mad about it. You got unlucky, whatever. But a freeze strategy means you're going to be playing this game for fucking 20 turns, 30 turns, and nothing is going to happen, and you're going to be so mad every time they pull a freeze card out. It's going to be very frustrating to play against. So, yeah, I mean, me personally, I'm hoping that Moment's Peace doesn't turn into anything extraordinary, just because I don't really like to play super, super long grind games. I like to play games where cool things can happen, but not like waiting 20 turns, waiting for your frozen units to unfreeze, but they never do, that kind of stuff. So, in summary, I think this is a really great expansion to the current cards. I'm really glad that the devs decided to implement pretty much all commons and 2 or 3 rares, which is I think it's very good for the player base because that means that it's not just speaking to people who spend a lot of money on the game. Obviously, people who spend money on the game also deserve to have like the extra enjoyment from cool legendaries and stuff. But the mass amount of the player base, they don't spend that much money. They want to play with the commons and rares, and this is doing exactly that. And I think that if you guys are looking at the cards right now and think any of them are like super overpowered or any of them like completely suck, like hold off on your reaction for a while. Like make your predictions, and if they come true, then you're a fucking genius. But if they don't, like a lot of the time that happens. Like what happens a lot in the Hearthstone community is that people have gut reactions to the cards, and that tends to only define the first week of the metagame after the release. And then after that, like people are like, "What? This card's so good. Like we never saw this happening." And I guarantee you that's going to happen this time. Like I'm probably wrong about half of the things that I said. It's fun to talk about them, but a lot of the times you have to see how they actually play in the game in order to know. Like professionals aren't right all the time either. In fact, most of the time they're wrong. Yeah. So I can't wait for these to actually hit the game. Peace out, guys.